guest is Will Kaback, a senior editor at Tangle, which is a nonpartisan news organization. Tangle News focuses on presenting multiple perspectives on complex political issues. They curate and analyze arguments from the left, the right, and the center to address an increasingly polarized political landscape. We are honored to have Will here today to discuss the role that journalists and other media outlets can play in both worsening or improving the state of healthy discourse throughout our nation.
So I think before we get started, if you want to share like a brief introduction on like your profile and what you do, that'd be appreciated.
So my name is Will Kaback. I am a senior editor at Tangle News. We're an independent, nonpartisan media organization, and we primarily focus on U.S. politics, covering national issues. But of course, that also spills into global and international issues, especially right now when there's a war in Iran that's broken out in the last week. So doing a lot of coverage of topics like that. I think what distinguishes us and what we really try to stick to in terms of our ethos and our mission is trying to bring people of all political persuasions and stripes under one roof and give them a news outlet that they feel like they can trust, that's going to give them balanced and reliable information, but also is going to foster a community where they feel comfortable putting their ideas out there and not feeling like they're going to be necessarily attacked for what they believe, but are going to be able to have productive discussions and hopefully also have their own ideas challenged in a productive way. So happy to talk more about how we do that, but that's like a general overview of what Tangle is.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Can you point to a specific experience that shaped how you approach forming nonpartisan opinions, whether it's about free speech or your work across different news outlets?
Yeah, for sure. To start kind of top level down, I think that working in a news organization like this, where we put a premium on sharing different arguments and perspectives and ideological diversity in every issue that we cover, it's a really humbling experience. Before I was doing work like this, I would say I was somebody who was very confident that I had the right opinion on a lot of issues, and I was very passionate about defending them. But when you actually engage in a charitable and a good faith way with people who disagree with you, and you don't just read caricatures of the way that they're presented, maybe if you're reading partisan news on one side or another, it actually becomes pretty humbling because you realize that people do have valid and well thought out experiences and arguments that differ from your own. And that doesn't make them bad people. It's just like part of the country that we live in and part of being an American. So I think big picture, that's informed my view on free speech and my support of free speech and my belief that it's what distinguishes the U.S. and makes us great and is something that we can't let slip. I think there have been a ton of examples of free speech issues coming to the fore just in the past year. We've had cases like Mahmoud Khalil, who was the student and activist who was arrested and is in deportation proceedings right now, ostensibly for statements that he made that in some people's eyes, merited removing him from the country, even though he had legal status. I think that raises really interesting free speech issues because it also clashes with the idea of, well, if somebody isn't a full citizen, then don't we have the right to just remove them and they don't have the same First Amendment protections that we do? And for me, I think those kinds of examples are actually exactly where we should affirm our belief in free speech, even if somebody doesn't technically have the same First Amendment rights as us as citizens necessarily. So that's one that comes to mind just from the past year. But like I said, we are living in a constant political environment where free speech on both sides of the aisle is being challenged. And so I think that's a cool thing about our work is that we try to create a platform where we exemplify more speech versus trying to restrict it.
Right. And building off your platform, it's definitely a very interesting platform. But what specific problem in modern media is Tangle trying to solve with this format, do you think?
We're trying to address media bias, and we see that manifesting in a few different ways that we're trying to counter with our model. One of the ways is things like story selection and language use. So a news outlet might cover a story completely accurately, but the stories that they're choosing to cover and the stories that they're not covering can tell you a lot about their ideological lean. And another part of that is the language that they use. So like we were just talking about immigration issues. You can pretty easily identify where somebody stands on the political spectrum if they call someone an illegal immigrant versus like an undocumented immigrant. So little language choices like that go a really long way in like biasing people towards, one way or another in what they're reading. It can also lead people to just like shutting down and not wanting to read coverage from an outlet because they think that it's like in the bag for one party or another. So we try to be really deliberate about that and cast a really wide net in the stories that we cover. At the same time, by sharing perspectives from 3 conservative writers and 3 liberal writers on every single topic we cover in the daily newsletter, that's our way of trying to force our audience outside of the ideological bubbles and the information silos and the draw of like confirmation bias, just like reading things that affirm the things you already believe. We're trying to push people out of that and get them to engage with these perspectives that exist for half the country, but they might not be getting exposed to them based on the news that they read. And really, in my mind, like we can get into it, but that's like a financial issue. A lot of news media models are just based on like getting clicks and keeping your audience locked in and coming back for more and more and more because you're feeding them the things, again, that they just want to hear or that get them fired up. And so we want to be something completely different. We want to actually challenge our audience and try to create a space where productive discussion happens versus just like tearing people down and demonizing the other side.
A big discussion we had with our last guest was how people use one-word replacements. He was mentioning in the same way that Trump calls people morons and stupid, the other side calls them homophobes and racist. And so while both are not a proper definition as to what this person comes from, what their background is, and what their true beliefs are. So I see how that is exemplified, especially through headlines. And a lot of times we get our information from headlines, from quick videos. And have you found that in discussions that, an increase in short form media and an increase in looking at just the headlines and not reading as much has made people more informed and more knowledgeable about the different things going on in the world, or less informed about the certain situation at hand?
I think there's an opportunity for social media and short form video to help people become more informed. But right now we're seeing mostly the downsides of it. It goes back again to just the model and what is effective for people in building an audience and building their personal brand. And that is the things that like catch your attention in that 1 second that you like swipe onto a video, and they have to hook you in that second. And so the most effective way, or at least the lowest hanging fruit way to do that, is to just put things in front of you that are going to like light up your brain and like light up your passions and your anger and those centers of your brain versus the more like calm, contemplative, slower thinking parts of your brain. So I think like that's what's succeeding right now. That being said, like we at Tangle, we publish a newsletter, but we also have a YouTube channel. We also put out shorts, reels, we have Instagram accounts, all of that. So we're trying to like see how we can model our approach across many different platforms. And I would say it's more effective right now in some than others. Like the newsletter has gained a great purchase and has been really successful for us. Things like YouTube and social media are just starting to like get traction. So I'm going to be really interested to see how it plays out. And I think like it's not a very linear path to get into that point, depending on the platform or the medium that you're in. But I do have optimism about it. I don't think it's like quite as doom and gloom as people necessarily think. And I do think that it probably starts with us as individuals. Like one thing that we like to say at Tangle is like when you engage with a tweet that's clearly meant to just be like rage bait or something like that, or when you click on the clickbait headline, you can think about it as like giving $1 to that person or to that news organization, because that's like what they're learning, right? They're just like learning that the more content like that they produce, like they're going to make more money off of it. And so I think like for us, it's a very small thing, but as individuals, like you can just think about like, I'm not going to give these people my money because I know what they're trying to do.
Right. So I'm curious. I know you mentioned you're doing some things to counteract the fact that it's so much more difficult and time consuming and like less of just like quick pleasure to kind of actually read an article that you might disagree with and hear other opinions, and you're giving $1 to someone. Do you think that like an individual's desire to have more nuanced opinions can overcome that want for self-confirmation? Like, do you think that'll eventually work out in Tangle's favor?
I think that it can, but I'm not sure. Like, I think it is going to be really, really difficult to overcome the forces that are pushing us in the other direction. But the flip side of the coin of what I'm describing, which is like more of the cynical, pessimistic case of the situation that we're in, is that because it's so much easier to have a voice in a platform on things like social media, or maybe on a publishing platform like Substack, where you can stand up a publication just with a few clicks versus like, imagine what it took to be like a legacy newspaper back in the day and all of the resources that required. Like, that is allowing people who are trying to be part of the solution to have a voice and a platform too. So I almost think like as individuals, it's about just like seeking out those people and trying to become a part of those communities versus just like being the mindless like scrolling. Because like that'll suck you in, obviously, and I'm victim to that myself. But I do think that like the solutions are out there. It's not something that like we need to search for necessarily right now. You just have to like stay committed to finding that, and when you do find it, be a part of the solution.
Yeah, it 100% goes both ways, because in all cases there are people who try to make an effort to depolarize, but there are others who are just polarizing and showing their own opinion just to get the rage of others and just to get the attention of others. And kind of returning to journalism, I think as students of the world, but also students of journalism, we see it everywhere, we read it everywhere. In what ways can we dilute news feeds and certain articles in order to pick out, what is coming from a place of bias and what is coming from a place of truth? Like, what are some habits that media literate people tend to have that is successful in understanding the situation truthfully without maybe having to rely on a company like Tangle to untangle it?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think there's a few different strategies that you can use, at least to like get yourself started and move yourself in that direction of media literacy. And then I almost feel like it's like a downhill slope at that point. It's like once you get started, like I think you find it get easier and easier as that literacy builds. One thing I would say is just like really try to read a wide variety of sources. Like if you find yourself just getting your news from social media or just getting it from one or two news outlets, you're not getting like a comprehensive picture of the issues. So something that I always try to do and that we do in our work at Tangle is read the same story from like 7 to 8 different outlets and see how they're covering it differently. Because you'll see certain outlets will focus on certain aspects of the story over others. They'll use certain quotes that others don't. And you can almost get like a completely different understanding of the story depending on which paper or outlet you're reading it in. So that would be number one. Number two, I would say you should ask yourself, like, do you feel like your perspective has been challenged on the issue going in? And if you read a story or you read a piece of commentary, you read somebody's opinion, and it just kind of conforms with what you already believe and doesn't make you question any aspect of it, you probably like haven't done a thorough enough search, because I can promise you those opinions and those perspectives are out there from legitimate voices. And so I think part of it is also like staying committed to that search and ensuring that you're not just letting yourself getting into that silo where you're just being fed the information that you basically already believe.
Right.
So those are two places I would start.
What do you think you'd say to those narrow-minded people who only like to read stuff that they believe in, only stuff that they're politically affiliated with? What advice would you give them to sort of open their horizons to explore more political insights?
I really try to meet people where they're at. Like, I think one of the worst things you can do is just like tell somebody like you're in an information silo or like you're getting brainwashed, whatever it might be. I think like all you're going to do is just push them further into that. So something that I do, like when I have conversations with people who maybe are skeptical of what we do at Tangle, is like I'll make sure that I ask them at least 3 questions about themselves and their beliefs before I tell them anything about me or what we do. And I find like number one, that builds trust and like a genuine human connection between us, but it also shows that I'm not just like trying to push my beliefs onto them. And I find that people open up way more easily that way. And again, like the idea isn't to like swing them to a certain argument or position that I want them to believe. We just want them to come and engage with this open debate platform that we're trying to foster. And so I think, like meeting people where they're at and just trying to show them that like you are genuinely interested in what they believe, that has a big effect, and people can tell when you come into those conversations, honestly.
Yeah. I really like what you say about meeting people about where they're at. I'm curious though, is there some place you draw a line in terms of like presenting all opinions and like meeting every opinion where it's coming from versus some opinions that maybe shouldn't be fully addressed?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think there obviously is a line. Like, I'm very hesitant to like say what it is objectively. I think we each have like our own subjective lines. For our purposes, like a very simple one that we draw is like we won't publish anything that's just putting outright falsehoods out there, just because like it happens to be in coming from one side or the other. We apply that rule evenly across the board. So we do like our own fact checking and vetting of commentary in that way. I will say though, I think that issue is like less prevalent than you might think. I think it's like a lot of the times you see partisans on either side portraying the other side's beliefs in really like distorted ways. But when you actually go and listen to them and read what they say, it's a lot more nuanced and frankly benign than it is made out to be. And so that's really why I think it is important to cast a wide net in where you're getting information. Because a lot of the time it's not so much the messenger, it's the way that message is being like distorted, like a game of telephone, you know, by the time it reaches you.
Yeah, another thing I've noticed is super interested in, especially in the conflict in the Middle East right now, is that while we think about these different groups on different sides, in a way it's becoming, a lot of people call it like a horseshoe. Far rights are very American focused. They don't want to engage in war in other countries. And the left, who also just do not want to get in the war. But these are the far. And in a way, they're aligning now. And so that's super interesting to see how these different political views that you have so separated are aligned on certain views. And I think that it comes through in these different articles. Like the Nick Fuenteses of the world are agreeing with the far lefts. And I think that's super interesting and that's easy to see.
I think Nick Fuentes said like yesterday, he's like, I'm going to vote for Democrats in 2026. Because like I'm pissed about Trump getting us into war. So like that's a perfect example of what you're describing.
And just a question for you is, how has Tangle approached the situation? I was reading today, Wall Street Journal and New York Times right next to each other. New York Times focus on Trump doesn't have a plan going forward. They had these initial attacks, but there doesn't seem to be much visibility, while the Washington Post focused on a lot of success in Iran. And I was wondering about how Tangle approached this. What steps you took to ensure the best story, in your opinion?
Yeah, something that we're really upfront with our audience about is just being comfortable saying, I don't know. There is a lot of information out there. Like, let's just take Iran as the example because it's top of mind right now. There's a lot of evidence out there to the Wall Street Journal editorial board's perspective that so far everything is going really well. We're ahead of schedule. We've had like a devastating effect on their defenses and military. You can find that information and a lot of it is credible. At the same time, like there is a lot of validity to the other perspective that, okay, we did these initial strikes, but now it's like a little bit unclear what's going to happen. How long are we going to be there? Are we going to put troops on the ground? The president isn't really communicating clearly about this. That's also happening. That's also true. I think there's a desire for it to be one or the other, but we're very comfortable being like, it can be parts of both. And we can hold both of these things at the same time. And I think for our audience, like that's the value we can provide is like, you don't have to have a fully developed opinion on this war yet. We're less than a week in. Things are changing by the hour, by the day. And so we want people to be comfortable just being like, this is going to be a process. There's going to be a lot of new developments that come that we can't anticipate. We're going to be here together trying to process these and try to pull in as much factual information as we can. But we don't need to declare whether it's a success or a failure yet.
Right. And going back to like the subjectivity of how everyone draws their own opinions and their own lines, I was curious, have there been moments where your team disagreed internally about how to frame an issue, whether it be like modern, like Iran, or a different sort of political topic?
Yeah, all the time. We have a core editorial staff of about 5 people, and I can honestly say that our politics to a person are different. Like, you know, there's plenty of overlap, but we also have fundamental disagreements on lots of issues. And one of the ways that we resolve that is we publish our take, like one writer's take, in addition to the left and right's perspectives in every newsletter. And if there is a member of the staff who strongly disagrees with that take, then we have a dissent section, like almost you would read in a Supreme Court opinion. And so we'll have that dissenting opinion to show like disagreement within our staff, let alone the disagreement we're showing across all of the perspectives. So that's been really cool, and our audience seems to appreciate that. And I would also just say we prize ideological diversity. I think I mentioned this before. So like if we all agreed on everything within a staff, we would have a problem. The more disagreements, the better. And it's honestly been really cool to see like how you can have these disagreements and still value these people as coworkers and friends and humans. And I think that part of the value we offer is how to model that as well.
Cool.
I was just wondering about what your views are on the State of the Union, what the Tangle's views are in the State of the Union. How much can we trust the president's word during that?
Yeah, I think it's always good to take any elected official's commentary, particularly a speech like the State of the Union, which in today's day and age essentially serves as like a campaign stump speech, to take that with a healthy dose of skepticism, no matter who it is, regardless of whether you voted for them or not. And so that's how we approached President Trump's State of the Union last week. And I think, we found that there were plenty of distortions and misstatements. There were probably some things that he got beat up on that he didn't quite deserve to be taken to the woodshed quite so hardly. But I think, overall, like, I felt like something unique about the speech was just like it focused a lot on like kind of violent and graphic language, which stood out to me. And again, like he was describing real things, but for a speech like that, it felt a little bit like a tough pill to swallow at a time when like a lot of people are on edge. And so I didn't love that approach personally, and that didn't have anything to do with like how factual the speech was. I just felt like I didn't come away feeling like very good. And so in that way, I think it maybe undermined his message a little bit.
And another question building off of the communication between the president, but also the executive branch with the people themselves, there doesn't seem to be a lot of communication from President Trump about the plans, and it doesn't seem to be very transparent, and he didn't really like go out and rally the people around the attacks in Iran. How do we balance the word of these politicians to the things we're hearing in journalism?
I think, again, a very healthy dose of skepticism is due for the exact reason you just described. Like after the strikes in June of 2025, where we targeted their nuclear facilities, the message was unambiguous from the White House. Like their capabilities were destroyed, these strikes were a success, and like the immediate threat was dealt with. And of course, like there is hypocrisy now in us saying that part of the justification for going in is because like they could have built a nuclear weapon that threatened us. And so like for that reason, I think like you have to listen to all of these justifications and say, all right, this may not be truthful. It already wasn't truthful. And so they've lost trust in that way. And I think like it is very understandable why people are doubting the lines coming out of the White House, and also because like the explanations seem to be shifting a lot day to day. That being said, that doesn't like preclude the chance that we do find like a degree of success in Iran in the long run. I think it's very hard to say like where this conflict is headed. Right now, I don't feel very good about where it's headed. I think the risk of like regional destabilization is really high, and this turning into like a protracted conflict that pulls in a bunch of other countries. But I think like the key is just like trying to pull in the information from various sources and not say like outright, I'm not going to trust this source, I'm not going to trust the White House, but like trying to at least like form a holistic opinion based on many different inputs, but also keeping that context in mind of who's been trustworthy in the past.
Right, and when you're framing the information, do you sort of categorize it into a political, economic, and social lens, or do you focus on the general picture most of the time?
Yeah, I like that question too. That's interesting. I don't think we're deliberately doing that. We're not bucketing it out in that way. That being said, like it naturally overlaps with those categories and those issues. And so a lot of our work does touch on that, but we don't explicitly label it that way. And I think, part of that is just because we cover a large range of issues, and so it might be difficult to consistently do that within our format. But also, I think like it can be helpful to just let people draw their own conclusions over time, and not try to like fit things into buckets when it's not always going to go perfectly that way.
Right. I think that also kind of speaks to what you said earlier about pluralism and just how Tangle doesn't always pick one or the other, even though that is easier for people to do. I'm curious, though, in terms of how much of the polarization that we have now do you think is is due to social media and the different types of news that we use versus the internal defense mechanisms maybe to protect our ideas? Like how much of an impact do you think the news has, and are there also other ways that we can kind of combat depolarization?
I think that the news and social media like triggers that kind of like deep-seated defensive mechanism that maybe you're describing. So like that is like a very human part of us. I think that's rooted in us, and is not something that we can probably ever do away with. But social media in particular has been fine-tuned to tap into that. And so in that way, it's like that's the tool, right, that like gets us to this place. I think that like a lot of it comes back to just being open-minded and trying to have conversations with people with whom you disagree. Isaac, our founder, the founder of Tangle, tells this story about like one of the best conversations that he's ever had was being at a beach, I think in New Jersey, and he saw a guy like sitting at like kind of like a family setup next to them who had like a giant Trump flag like planted in the sand, just like waving in the wind next to them, like almost like meant to be in your face obnoxious. And like it would have been really easy to just be like, oh, you know, this guy's just like trying to piss people off, like he's trying to get a reaction out of people. But Isaac just like went over to him, he like brought him like a soda from their cooler and just like had that conversation with him that I was describing to you. Like he just like asked him some questions and like got to know him at first, and it ended up being like a really meaningful conversation. They talked about Tangle, you know, they talked about like why that guy likes Trump so much and like why he feels the need to do stuff like that. And they had like a genuine human conversation that didn't start from a place of like, this person is like my enemy. So I think the more that we can just like seek those out in our individual lives, that is the way that we like get in a step towards solving polarization and becoming more whole as a nation. And again, that doesn't mean we all have to agree on everything. We just have to figure out how to talk about those disagreements in a more productive way.
Right. I think that's a great point. And going back to Davis's comment when he asked about whether a line should be drawn at any specific point, if there's a moment in the conversation that you're having where you're specifically viewing what the other person's saying is like morally wrong, should respect still be given? Should a willingness and an openness to have that conversation still persist?
I think yes. And I understand that people feel differently. And I think that that's a completely valid belief. Like, I don't think that, you know, just in the service of trying to meet people where they're at and have better conversations and heal polarization, you need to like cross your own moral lines. So if you feel differently than me, then I get that. And I think like more power to you, and you got to do what you got to do. To like go about your days and just like, you know, live a healthy life for yourself. That being said, like my personal feeling is that if somebody is saying things that are really offensive to me, or I feel like they're crossing lines, I almost like see that as a cry for help. And to me, like the way to address that is not to push people away, but to try to like talk them down off of the ledge, and try to like figure out what the actual root of what they're going through is. I think that that's difficult to do, but I personally have found that really rewarding, and I've had a lot of like fulfilling relationships in my life because of that, to this day even. And so that's the way that I approach it, but I understand like it's a very fraught issue, and if people feel differently, then that's totally fine too.
Yeah, I think that being good models of discourse in small conversations, whether that be with your family or the people around you, is very important, because that other person, if that were to go differently on the beach, that other person's walking away like, oh, wow, I was very impressed. Like maybe they were heated about it, but if you yourself are the person who is practicing, like learning, acknowledging, and listening to the perspective, then that person's going to walk away and reflect about the situation and understand that, you know, this guy kept his cool. Like he knew what he was doing, and it may result in a change of heart. So even if you aren't agreeing, just modeling good discourse and conversation helps shift the perspectives of others.
Right. And our last guest also sort of emphasized the fact that words can hurt. And I think as a society, we have to accept that as a truth, especially if we want to advance discourse and healthy relationships. We have to acknowledge the fact that sometimes people who disagree with you, it's not fun to hear what the other side has to say, but it's sort of a must in, you know, advancing our dialogue.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
We talk a lot about how individuals themselves can kind of go and prove the way that they approach the media through all the things we've discussed. I'm curious though. Let's just do a fun hypothetical. If you could design an app that would serve as the media outlet to everyone in the United States, how would you design it and present the information?
Yeah, wow, that's a really interesting hypothetical. I think I don't mean to sound self-promotional, but I think it would probably look pretty similar to Tangle. I think the one thing that we don't have consistently is like our own original reporting. A lot of our work focuses on analysis and commentary. And so I think that what I would want to build is a news offering where you had a newsroom that was solely focused on just reporting on current events in a very kind of balanced, fact-forward way. And then a clear delineation, like if you think about it like an app, like you've got like one tab that's your news tab, and then the other tab would be like the opinion tab, which would resemble what we have in Tangle, where you could read perspectives about the reporting from commentators on both sides of the political spectrum. And then the last thing I would have that I think is really key here is like make it a community. So it's not just like reading, but you can also be like having conversations with other people on that platform about the issues, and hopefully having like having constructive discussions about it. So it's not just like you're a consumer, but you're also a participant in this debate.
Got it. Now, a few other questions about this app. Would the truth tab be first? Would you open up to the news tab and then go to the opinions tab if you wanted?
Yes, I think that is the best way to consume news. I think if you start from a commentary perspective, you're going to be missing a lot of crucial details.
And then for the community part of it, would there be any sort of censorship around what people are saying, or to be fully free speech?
I think that we would probably have like a loose content moderation. Like if you're using like slurs, I think we would moderate that. I don't think we would ever moderate like a genuine argument that's being presented, even if it may be like hinged into something that someone found offensive or like discriminatory towards a group. Like if you were just making an argument and it wasn't about like personally attacking people or using language that was like broadly recognizable as offensive, then I don't think we would have any moderation of that.
So the truth tab comes first, you say, and I agree with that, obviously. I'm curious, though, do you think even if conversations aren't fully rooted in fact, like if someone isn't the most informed, if two people want to talk with each other still with kind of more emotional backgrounds, do you think that conversation and dynamic could still be fruitful, or is it not worth having if it's not grounded in fact?
I think that it's still worth having for like the sake of engaging with people who you disagree with. That comes with risks and trade-offs, but you can't like get in the habit of doing it unless you get reps. You know, it's like almost like a sport. Like if you're picking up a sport for the first time or any activity really, like you're probably going to be like pretty bad at it. It might not feel good at first, but like the reward comes from sticking with it and getting the practice reps and getting to a place where like you're able to do it more comfortably. So that's like the analogy I use for myself. I mean,
more of a skill set.
I think like it applies beyond sports too, but just like to give an example.